Hi, this is the AI Storyteller. I'm Mark. Today's book that I will interpret for you is the novel Resurrection, written by the Russian writer Leo Tolstoy. Tolstoy is a world-renowned literary master. His representative works include War and Peace, Anna Karenina, and today's interpretation of Resurrection. He not only pushed Russian literature to a new peak with these three novels, but also conquered the world. Resurrection, published in 1899, is generally considered one of Tolstoy's most important works and is hailed as a masterpiece of 19th-century realism. It is Tolstoy's longest work created after his worldview transformation in his later years. This novel embodies the most important theory of Tolstoy's later years, Tolstoism. In summary, this theory mainly includes principles such as do not resist evil with violence, self-moral perfection, and universal love. Tolstoy was born into an aristocratic family and lived a life of luxury. In his later years, he made a profound self-reflection and even said that the works that had won him fame before were immoral. He decided to give up all pure artistic creations, and all subsequent works were used to promote Tolstoism. In other words, Tolstoy in his later years changed from a literary artist to a preacher. What story does Resurrection tell? The title of the novel points out its theme. The lost conscience can be reborn under the influence of some spiritual power. The story of the novel is based on a real case. The daughter of a tenant farmer was adopted by a female landlord after her father died. When the girl was 16 years old, she was seduced and abandoned by a noble young man. The girl became pregnant and gave birth to a baby, and then was driven out of the house. The child was sent to an infant care center. The girl was forced to become a prostitute. Later, she was sent to court for stealing money from clients, and the noble young man who seduced her was one of the jurors. The noble young man saw the defendant and was deeply shocked. In order to atone for his sins, he decided to marry her. However, before he could fulfill his promise, the girl died of typhoid fever. In Resurrection, the relationship between the male and female protagonists is basically consistent with the real case. The female protagonist is called Maslova, and the male protagonist is called Nekhlyadov. Tolstoy tells the story of these two people regaining new life in the spiritual world around the theme of resurrection. However, unlike the prototype story, Maslova did not steal money from a client, but was falsely accused of murder. Tolstoy did not stop the story at the end of the trial, but expanded the story and added some dramatic conflicts after the trial. The setting of a girl who was seduced and fell into depravity, and a nobleman who suddenly realized his conscience was not fresh even in 1899. However, Tolstoy used such an old-fashioned plot to show various social ills in Russian society at that time through Nekhlyadov's perspective on his complex relationships with various levels of society and various events caused by this, making Resurrection a recognized realistic classic. In the interpretation, we will see specifically what revelations and criticisms Tolstoy made. Tolstoy spent 10 years creating Resurrection, but he was not very satisfied. He once told his publisher, "If I modify it to my satisfaction, I may never finish writing it. I have to hand it over to the publisher, and can only let it be like this." The literary world's attitude towards Resurrection is also relatively complicated. People recognize its greatness, but also see many flaws. For example, there are some speeches in the novel that promote the gospel, which are not organically integrated with the story and look stiff. Tolstoy has spent 10 years creating it. Why not spend a little more time modifying it and plugging those loopholes? He published Resurrection to make money. He needed money urgently. At that time, a group of Russian peasants were persecuted by the government because they refused to serve in the army. Canada was willing to accept them, but there were many people and they lacked travel expenses. Tolstoy decided to submit his work in progress as soon as possible and used the manuscript fee to raise funds. In the end, these peasants successfully arrived in Canada. It can be said that the resurrection in the title has its meaning not only related to the story plot but also in real life. Tolstoy's help to these peasants was not only out of sympathy but also related to the high-pressure monopoly of Eastern Orthodoxy in Russia at that time. The relevant situation is also reflected in the novel, which we will discuss later. Well, today's interpretation has three parts. In the first part, we will learn about the story plot of resurrection and what kind of resurrection the two protagonists experienced. In the second part, let's take a look at what social reality Tolstoy revealed in this realistic masterpiece. In the third part, let's take a look at what is the core content of Tolstoism. Why did Tolstoy's worldview change in his later years? Part 1. We enter the story of resurrection. The opening part of Resurrection is recognized as one of the best segments in the entire book. Tolstoy used the female protagonist Maslova's trial as the starting point of narration to contrast the lives of the male and female protagonists, and show the huge gap in life between different classes in Russia. At the beginning of the story, Maslova was escorted out by a jailer wearing prison clothes. She had to travel a long way to stand trial. At this time, Nekhlyadov had just gotten up. He was wearing comfortable pajamas and thinking about his complicated private life. He was preparing to participate in a trial as a juror. The process of starting the trial was very slow. Most jurors were absent-minded and did not understand what responsibilities they had. The presiding judge did not carefully investigate the case beforehand. He just wanted to finish it quickly so that he could go and meet his mistress. After the trial began, Nekhlyadov recognized Maslova, but she did not recognize him. Then, Tolstoy explained the past stories of both protagonists through a flashback. Originally, Maslova's current situation is closely related to Nekhlyadov. Maslova was originally the illegitimate daughter of a serf and coincidentally became the adopted daughter of two female landlords. Under the education of the two adoptive mothers, Maslova had a devout faith. On the Orthodox Easter holiday, she not only blessed a beggar with leprosy all over his body but also kissed him 3 times according to custom. This plot is one of the most brilliant descriptions in the entire book. However, Nekhlyadov's appearance changed Maslova's fate. Nekhlyadov was a relative of the female landlord and was originally a simple and kind young nobleman. When he stayed at the female landlord's house, he raped Maslova under the domination of desire. The next day, he left 100 rubles and abandoned Maslova. But what he didn't expect was that Maslova became pregnant and was driven out because of it. Maslova's child died on the way to the nursery, and she wandered to St. Petersburg after suffering many insults and harassment, forced to make a living by prostitution. A guest was murdered, Maslova was implicated and became a murder suspect. And Nekhlyadov, who caused all this torture for her, became a juror in her trial. Many past events are unfolded through Nekhlyadov's memories. He realized that Maslova's fall was caused by himself. In the novel, Tolstoy used a vivid metaphor to show Nekhlyadov's psychological state. He wrote, "Like a little dog that has done something bad in the room, the owner grabbed its collar and let its nose smell its excrement. The little dog barked and retreated desperately, trying to stay away from the consequences it caused as much as possible and forget it. But the unyielding owner just wouldn't let it go." Not only that, Nekhlyadov also realized that his previous dissolute, cruel, and proud life was despicable and vulgar. In the subsequent trial, the presiding judge tried to show off his cleverness, causing the already confused jurors to be even more disinterested in the case. With the efforts of Nekhlyadov, the jurors unanimously agreed that Maslova was innocent. However, at the end of the trial, a ridiculous scene occurred. The jurors only said that Maslova did not steal the client's property, but forgot to declare that Maslova did not kill anyone. As a result, Maslova was sentenced to murder and was exiled to Siberia for 15 years of hard labor. After the trial, Nekhlyadov fell into remorse. Maslova's wrongful case shocked him, and he realized his own guilt. His spirit began to resurrect, and he was determined to use his actions to atone for his sins. He decided to marry Maslova and work hard to help her clear her name. If he failed, he would go to Siberia with her. Why did Nekhlyadov suddenly have a conscience? He was not born a plebeian. When he met Maslova, he was still a pure college student. When he left Maslova and went to serve in the army, he became another person because of the influence of other dandies. The fallen Nekhlyadov found that after giving up moral constraints, not only did he live more comfortably, but he also had fewer difficulties to solve. Moreover, he even received praise from people around him because of this. However, when he met Maslova in court, those moral constraints that he had abandoned returned to him. In addition, Nekhlyadov also began to doubt the legitimacy of his own life. He saw the tragic situation of the lower classes and realized the sins of his own class. Before helping Maslova, he decided to return all his land to the peasants. But things were not as simple as he thought. He spent a lot of effort persuading the peasants to return their land. Why did it take so much effort? Because at that time Russia had just experienced the reform of serfdom and the peasants were free people, but the land was still controlled by feudal aristocrats or emerging landlords. The exploitation of landlords on peasants intensified, and this led peasants to completely distrust the landlord class. They simply didn't believe that someone would give them benefits for no reason. Afterwards, Nekhlyadov went to the prison to recognize Maslova and confess to her. He expressed his regret and said he would help her clear her name and marry her. However, Maslova seemed indifferent. This was because Nekhlyadov's initial confession was all based on I, and this kind of self-moved sacrifice, although sincere, could not move people. Let's take a look at what happened to Maslova's spiritual world. She once lost faith in life and no longer believed in God, kindness, and love. However, life in prison restored Maslova's belief in life and restored her original purity. Her spirit began to resurrect. Because she came into contact with some political prisoners here, she found that there were also nobles among these people who sold their lives for the revolution, not for themselves but to save the oppressed lower class. She suddenly realized that the meaning of life is not only personal enjoyment. In contact with Nekhlyadov, Maslova gradually felt his piety and kindness. Every time she met Nekhlyadov, she would also help some inmates make requests to him. When Nekhlyadov completed Maslova's entrustment, he realized that wrongful imprisonment was not an isolated phenomenon. For example, a young farmer's wife was occupied by a landlord. The landlord not only beat the farmer who came to find his wife but also burned his own house the next day and falsely accused the young farmer of being a politically motivated arsonist. Some people were exiled and sentenced to hard labor just because they criticized the church when they gathered together to read the gospel. In order to help Maslova clear her name and complete other prisoners' requests, Nekhlyadov continued to work through his social relationships. However, the more progress he made, the more depressed he became. Correcting an unambiguous mistake is clearly a legitimate thing to do, but he has to use improper means such as backdoor channels and relationships to achieve it. Otherwise, even if the parties are reasonable, no one will pay attention. Without the help of nobles, what would be the fate of these wrong people? The more he rushed around, the more clearly Nekhlyadov saw the ugly face of Russia's noble class. Some of these noble classes have declined, while others still enjoy high social status. They indulge in their desires and trample on morality as if it were a privilege to be proud of. They are like a poison that poisons everything around them without being noticed. This kind of life is exactly what Nekhlyadov enjoyed before. Although Nekhlyadov was active everywhere, everyone he entrusted admitted that Maslova had been wrong but still failed to overturn the case. Maslova will go to Siberia as scheduled. Nekhlyadov decided to give up everything and accompany Maslova to Siberia. If Nekhlyadov originally decided to marry Maslova for redemption, he fell in love with the spiritually reborn Maslova again. On the way of exile, many prisoners died because they could not adapt to the harsh environment. The indifference of the escorting jailer and the nobles he encountered made Nekhlyadov completely disappointed with the ruling class and the system. As the exiled team marched forward, the story also came to an end. In the first draft of the novel, Nekhlyadov and Maslova were originally married, and Nekhlyadov followed Maslova to settle in Siberia and began writing books. But Tolstoy gave up such a big reunion and changed it to a relatively open ending. Maslova did not marry Nekhlyadov but combined with political prisoner Simonson and stood with those who fought for oppressed people. Nekhlyadov found his way of redemption from the gospel. Forgive everyone forever countless times because there is no innocent person in the world, so it is impossible to punish or transform others. This ending actually expresses Tolstoy's hope for the resurrection of a corrupt society. The method of resurrection is to promote Nekhlyadov's understanding to everyone, but whether this is the correct method or not, Tolstoy also pointed out in the last sentence of the story, the future will give a conclusion. Part 2. We just learned about the main plot of the novel Resurrection together. Tolstoy's creation is regarded as the most sober realism. Next, let's take a look at the social background under which Tolstoy created and what criticisms he made in the novel. We know that Tolstoy began writing this novel in 1889. In the early 1880s, radical revolutionaries believed that the Tsar was not resolute enough in implementing serfdom reforms and assassinated Tsar Alexander II. However, the Tsarist ruling class did not disintegrate because of this assassination operation, nor did it compromise and increase reform efforts, resulting in many social reforms that were halfway through being significantly reversed. After Alexander III succeeded to the throne, he began to deploy spies throughout Russia and arrested revolutionaries on various grounds on a large scale, accelerating the outbreak of later revolutions. It can be said that the background of Resurrection is when the Tsarist ruling class oppressed the lower-level people most heavily. In the novel, Tolstoy uses the protagonist's insights to show the real situation behind Russia's legal society, the hypocrisy of Eastern Orthodoxy, and the hypocrisy of Russian nobles with a white description-like technique. First, let's take a look at what the real situation behind Russia's legal society is like. Take Maslova's wrongful conviction during her trial as an example. The whole thing is sad and shameful. This courtroom farce allows us to see some of the shortcomings of Russia's legal system at that time. Russia established the Russian jury system based on the characteristics of many countries' laws. There are 3 judges in the court, one of whom is the presiding judge. The judges are not only responsible for maintaining order in the court but also directly responsible for hearing cases. In addition, there are 12 jurors who are unrelated to the original defendant. Everyone, regardless of their background, is eligible to be a juror. Whether it is a farmer or a nobleman, they have the right to judge whether a person is guilty. In Russia at that time, having such a jury was a commendable progress. However, there were also many shortcomings. One is that jurors do not understand what responsibilities they have. People who have not received much education may not be clear about their responsibilities and may not even understand what the judge said when interrogating the suspect. Educated nobles who participate in trials only because they will be fined if they do not perform their duties hope to end the case quickly, and do not care about what actually happened. Also, the interrogation in court is completely dominated by judges, but judges do not participate in the verdict, which makes the judge's subjective opinion a key factor affecting the interrogation. In the most exaggerated case, if the judge thinks that the case is very clear, he can even skip questioning and let the jurors make a decision after the prosecutor's statement. In addition, Russia has produced a group of legal workers who exploit legal loopholes for profit. They use people's ignorance of the law to obtain a lot of wealth. The victims include not only farmers but also ignorant nobles. These people manipulate the law and use it for their own benefit. They even take pride in it and believe that money and status are standards for everything. When Maslova was living in prison, she saw routine worship ceremonies held for criminals. This description shows the hypocrisy of Eastern Orthodoxy in Russia at that time. The prison's worship ceremony was held every Sunday and was like a farce. The church was built magnificently and brightly while prisoners were naked and their chains clinked. The priest wanted to comfort the prisoners' souls, so he mechanically repeated the praise words with a strange false voice, hoarse and without any compassionate heart. He did not believe that those words of praise would benefit the prisoner's soul. He only believed that he had to believe in this faith. Most prisoners did not understand the priest's words but believed that listening to the priest's praise words could benefit them in this life and the next. As for the hypocrisy of the Russian aristocracy, it is more shown through Nekhlyadov's perspective. For example, he met an old general who managed the St. Petersburg prison. This general put male and female political prisoners in single cells and wanted these people to die half within 10 years. Some became mentally ill, some died of tuberculosis, and some committed suicide. During the conversation, Nekhlyadov mentioned that the situation of political prisoners in prison was very difficult. The old general said that the conditions he provided for prisoners were very comfortable and were rare in other prisons. Also, Nekhlyadov felt that his sister was his closest person. So before going to Siberia, he told his sister that he would leave all his property except land to his sister's children. His sister said, "Please don't say such things," but Nekhlyadov found that his sister was actually very happy. In fact, Tolstoy did not intend to exaggerate or pursue comedy effects, but the absurd reality of Russian society made realistic descriptions ironic. It is the power generated by these ironies that makes Nekhlyadov begin to doubt the aristocratic class he belongs to, and even the entire Russian ruling system in his heart. In his later years, Tolstoy changed from a writer to a preacher. He wanted to promote Tolstoism through his works. In the third part of the novel Resurrection, we will specifically look at what the core content of Tolstoism is and why the worldview of this literary master has changed. As mentioned earlier, Tolstoism wants to convey three ideas: do not resist evil with violence, morally self-improvement, and universal love. They are embodied in the character Nekhlyadov. First, let's look at the principle of not resisting evil with violence. In the last chapter of the novel, Nekhlyadov opened the Gospel and realized that if he wanted to save people from unbearable evil, he could not punish others or make others repent. Why? In Nekhlyadov's view, punishing guilty people not only does not reduce the number of criminals, but also increases them. Because in addition to criminals, there is another group of criminals who judge and punish others, such as judges, prosecutors, interrogators, and prison guards. This also reflects Tolstoy's thinking about violence. He believes that violence is the most important evil. Using violence to resist violence is equivalent to using evil to resist evil. This cannot eliminate evil. So how can we resist evil? Rely on morally self-improvement. Nekhlyadov's Resurrection fully embodies the principle of morally self-improvement. He went from indulging in lust and decadence at the beginning to recognizing his own sins. When he was running around for Maslova, he also saw the sins of the aristocracy. Finally, he learned from the Gospel that there are no innocent people in the world. The true way of redemption is to forgive everyone forever and countless times. Therefore, Nekhlyadov not only turned from evil to good but also moved towards universal love through moral self-improvement. Universal love is the core of Tolstoism. Love yourself, love others, love enemies, and love all people. In Tolstoy's view, love is the only and highest rule of life. As long as everyone loves each other, a world without violence and moral perfection will appear. Nekhlyadov's spiritual journey is almost a projection of Tolstoy's painful contemplation in his later years. The process of Nekhlyadov's spiritual resurrection is also Tolstoy's process of overcoming his own limitations and demanding himself to achieve moral perfection. Like Nekhlyadov, Tolstoy also came from a Russian noble family. When his father died, he left him with property and thousands of acres of land, and hundreds of serfs. Tolstoy was used to the life of a landowner from an early age, and he liked this kind of life. In his youth, he lived a luxurious and indulgent life in Russian high society, while recording his true words and deeds in his diary for self-analysis. Tolstoy was once addicted to gambling and owed a lot of gambling debts. In 1855, he lost his most beloved house. He said in his diary, "I feel that writing is meaningless. I feel sick of myself. I want to forget my existence." He began to hate his past life, those days of excessive eating, drinking, whoring, and gambling. As he grew older, he saw the strong contrast between his life and that of the peasants at the bottom. His conscience was tormented, and his conscience began to awaken. In the early 1880s, Tolstoy experienced a major spiritual crisis in his life. According to his account and confession, he found that things that had provided value support for his life in the past, such as family happiness and artistic creation, suddenly became meaningless. The thoughts of great philosophers could not bring him comfort, and the oppression of Eastern orthodoxy made him completely unacceptable. In confusion, Tolstoy suddenly realized that he could place his faith among the poor but simple Russian peasants. He wanted to go among the peasants, give up his privileges, and live a life based on agricultural labor and friendship like peasants, full of moral truth. In Tolstoy's later years, he divided his life into 3 periods. Before the age of 34, he lived only for his own desires, including eating and drinking, hunting and vanity. Thereafter, he began to pay attention to others and human welfare, but this attention was once dormant. In the last period, he began to care about the fate of all mankind, advocated not using violence to resist evil, realized moral self-improvement, and realized equality and friendship for all mankind. From an artistic point of view, Tolstoy quoted the Gospel a lot in his novels and used Nekhlyadov's mouth for moral preaching. This approach is a bit stiff. Many commentators therefore believe that this has reduced the artistry of resurrection itself and is not as high as the artistic level of War and Peace and Anna Karenina. However, no matter how many flaws there are in Resurrection, they cannot conceal the greatness of this realistic novel. Tolstoy used meticulous techniques to depict the characters that Nekhlyadov saw and contacted, and their appearance actually constituted the most vital part of this work. The criminals, prison guards, judges, generals, and nobles that Nekhlyadov encountered, their behavior and language have formed a panoramic view of Russian society at that time. The extensive and profound social content they reflected far exceeded the story of a spiritually resurrected corrupt aristocrat itself. For example, when Nekhlyadov was running around for Maslova and other prisoners, his gaze could let us see the social environment of Russia at that time and the appearance of administrative officials at all levels of the government. From generals in direct control to prison guards, almost everyone was numb and ruthless. They had lost their love and sympathy, which was chilling. In addition to reflecting the Russian social environment, the thinking about human nature and resurrection also shows us Tolstoy's great ideological tension. Such ideological tension comes not only from Tolstoy's deep concern about Russian social problems, but also from his self-doubt. Tolstoy once stated in confession that although his life was perfect in the eyes of ordinary people, he always had an unsolvable problem in his heart. For the question of what is the meaning of human survival, he came to a desperate conclusion: life is evil and meaningless. He observed that people in similar situations as himself had come to similar conclusions and felt equally desperate. He also found that people who believed that life is evil would escape the problem in 4 different ways. Some people would use ignorance to escape despair, just like Maslova, who was at a loss after being abandoned. Since they could not understand the current life, they simply turned a blind eye. Others would use hedonism to escape despair, just like Nekhlyadov before awakening. They found that the pursuit of the meaning of life was fruitless, so they simply fell into hedonism. Others take the way of destroying life to escape. Tolstoy once thought that this was the most valuable way to escape and even tried to imitate it. The last way to escape is weakness, which is to realize that life has no meaning but dare not commit suicide and hold on to life tightly. Tolstoy said that he was the kind of person who used weakness to escape. But he finally realized that only by relying on some kind of faith beyond reason can life have real meaning, and in Tolstoy's view, this is religion. This idea is reflected in all aspects of Tolstoy's life, including his creation. Therefore, in Resurrection, Nekhlyadov finally realized spiritual resurrection through the Gospel. Although Tolstoy eventually relied on religion to get out of the dilemma of life is evil, perhaps we can replace religion with other things that can be called belief, which may become the answer to the question of what is the meaning of life. This story, with preaching meaning more than 100 years ago, still has extremely high practical significance today and will continue to be discussed and interpreted by people. Because it not only calls for people to return to humanity and morality, but also triggers people's thinking, how to choose their own position and find their own beliefs in the complicated social life. Conclusion. The essence of this novel Resurrection has been interpreted for you here. Let's summarize it briefly. Leo Tolstoy is a world-renowned literary master, but in his later years, he chose to become a preacher rather than a writer. Because he experienced a worldview transformation, all his creations must be used to promote his Tolstoism. The main content of this theory is: do not resist evil with violence, self-moral perfection, and universal love. The works that can concentrate on reflecting Tolstoism are the last one of the 3 major novels: Resurrection, Resurrection is a masterpiece in 19th century realistic novels. Its theme is the extinct conscience can be reborn under the influence of some spiritual power. The two protagonists of the novel, Maslova and Nekhlyudov, both regained new life in the spiritual world. Maslova was forced into a corrupt life because she was seduced by Nekhlyudov and was falsely accused of murder, but she found her faith in life again in prison life. She saw from revolutionary political prisoners that the meaning of life is not only personal enjoyment. Nekhlyudov was shocked by Maslova's injustice case and realized his guilt. When helping Maslova and other prisoners overturn their cases, Nekhlyudov saw the suffering and indifference of ordinary people and aristocratic bureaucrats at all levels of government. He finally found his redemption path in the gospel. Nekhlyudov's spiritual resurrection process not only shows the style of Russian society at that time but also shows us Tolstoy's mental journey in his later years. He was born into the Russian aristocracy and was once dominated by his own desires. However, later he began to step out of the circle of aristocracy and entered ordinary peasant life, paying attention to other people's welfare and even human welfare as a whole. He originally thought that life is evil and meaningless. But he was not trapped by this answer but continued to think about it, and realized that only by relying on some kind of faith beyond reason can life have real meaning. I hope that this work today in Tolstoy's thinking can inspire you and help you better think about the meaning of life. Well, that concludes the content for this episode. If you enjoyed my video, please click like, subscribe to my channel, and share it with your friends. Thank you.